Welcome to Chiro Movement Muscle and Joint Clinic. Today we have Tyler, and he works for Park City Ski Patrol, but I would actually like him to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his background, his education, where he came from, what he does, that sort of thing.
So I am a medical first responder. I work for Park City Mountain Resort in the wintertime. During the summertime, I am a mountain guide and volunteer for search and rescue operations. This last summer, I worked at Denali National Park, guiding up there. Other than that, I am an athlete and focus mostly on rock climbing, mountaineering, and skiing.
Cool. And he's also currently doing something really cool. He went back to school for nursing, so he wanted to
just advancing medical certifications so that hopefully in the future I can do flight nursing.
There you go. So, like I said, he currently is working Ski Patrol. And as Ski Patrol first responder, you see a lot of injuries.
Yep.
So what are one of the most common injuries you see?
Most common injury you'll see is anything to do with the knee. A lot of the times people talk about ACL injuries, which are definitely common, but you'll get LCLs, MCLs as well.
Cool. And with knee injuries like that, as a first responder, like, what do you guys do? What do you advise people to do?
So the first thing I would advise people when it comes to knee injuries and skiing is to make sure that your skis are adjusted correctly. There's a release setting under skis called DIN, and it changes how easily your boot comes out of the ski when torsional forces are applied. They came up with releasable bindings sometime in the 90s, and they've really decreased the amount of injuries to people's knees because you don't get that massive torsional force on your knee. Instead, the boot ejects and you fly out of your ski. That is the first thing I would check. The second thing I would check is that you are skiing within your ability and doing it slowly. Most of the injuries that we see on the mountain are on green runs, regardless of people's ability. Speed is the main factor that goes into injuries.
Almost like an overconfidence type of thing.
It's overconfidence, but it's also, if you screw up going at a high speed, you're more likely to get injured than if you're going at a slow speed. People almost never get injured in difficult terrain, like blacks, double blacks. It's super rare that people get injured. We only see a couple every season. But greens, it's every single day. Like expert to beginner skiers are getting hurt, mainly because they're going too fast.
Interesting. And then when you do respond to a call on the slopes, what can people expect? Granted, it's going to depend on the injury, right?
Right. So mostly as a ski patroller, what we're going to do for you is we're going to stabilize your injury, which generally involves some sort of splinting, and we're just going to take you down and get you to a doctor. At Park City Mountain Resort, we have a couple clinics at the base which have docs and x-rays, and they're pretty good at dealing with any sort of orthopedic injury. But if it's something more advanced, we can definitely do more advanced medical kind of procedures, but mostly it's we're just going to transport and stabilize you and get you down to the mountain.
Very cool. Very cool. And then, so ski patrollers, they tend to work lots of hours,
Yep.
long days. They're on the slopes all the time. So, and we know that skiing can be really tough on the joints. As ski patrollers, do you often experience overuse injuries, and how do you combat those?
So the main thing patrollers that get patrollers is the exposure. So there's kind of a risk assessment that you make. Ski patrollers tend to be very good at skiing, and because you're skiing professionally, you're skiing defensively. You're generally skiing slower and you ski less aggressively than you would if you were on a day off skiing. But the exposure is still there. So
when you say exposure, like environmental exposure?
I mean hours in which you are skiing, essentially exposure to risky actions, yeah. And generally, ski patrollers work 50 to 70 hours a week, and most of that time is on skis. So regardless of how good you are, the tendency and probability for an accident to happen just stacks up as you get more and more hours. The biggest thing that I do is every day before I go out on the slopes, there's this stop sign. And I hit it, and I think of one way that I'm going to improve my skiing today. Essentially, I'm not thinking about how to be like rad. It's how do I get back to the locker room in the same state that I was before. A lot of the times I'll focus on, leaning forward in my skis. If I lean forward in my skis when I'm initiating my turns, it not only protects my knees, but it makes it so that if I eject from my skis, there's going to be less backwards torsional force on my knee and more forward force, which the knee can handle. I focus on essentially the proprioception of when my edges are engaging, right? A lot of the times you'll see skiers catch an edge accidentally and you just go down immediately, or if you carve out too long, essentially your back ends will skid out and your front ends will go and you'll lose control. I mean, there's so much of skiing that you can focus on.
Right. No, actually, I'm loving this, and I understand there's a lot to it, but from like a biomechanical standpoint, I think it'd actually be really interesting to have you give a brief synopsis, because there's a lot to it.
Okay.
But kind of work up the kinetic chain, like starting from the feet to the knees to the hips, and then even like torso, core, shoulders. Like, can you give us like a brief synopsis of how that all works together? I know, loaded question.
So I'm sure a ski instructor would give a very different answer than I would. Ski instructors definitely focus on more like aesthetic skiing, whereas ski patrollers generally deal with more practical skiing. We're carrying heavy loads when we're skiing. We're skiing all the time. We're skiing in really bad conditions. So the first thing I would say is that when you're skiing with your feet, starting from the bottom of the chain, you should be essentially flat-footed and all of your weight should be evenly distributed on your feet. And when you're making turns, you should be focusing on putting your weight into your outside toes. And that's going to, for the most part, get your body weight positioning over your skis at the right point. Because too far forward and you essentially can't navigate and use your skis as well, and too far back you risk injury, and the same thing is equally true. all that being said, like tending to go a little more forward on your feet when you start your turns is what's naturally going to happen. But if you can keep a neutral stance, it allows you to, if anything is weird in the snowpack, it allows you to adjust more quickly. Ankles are essentially stuck in the boot. The boot is a giant cast. Your shins should always be touching the front of your ski boot. And ski boots have a certain flex, and mine are pretty soft since I'm in ski boots all of the time.
Soften up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you should be able to put a quarter on your shin here when you're skiing, and it should stay there the entire day. Granted, you'll unweight that when you get on the chairlift, but always keeping your weight into your ski boot, and that's going to keep your body weight slightly forward, and the flex is going to support you, so you have to use less of your other musculature. Knees are going to be slightly bent. Your center of mass should be slightly above your knees, forward. And a lot of the times, I ski a really long ski. I'm 5'10", and I ski a 189. And because of that, I'm always keeping my perceived center of mass far in front of me on the ski. And I try to turn with my ski about 10 inches past where my ski is. And that allows my hips to be in the right place, because your hips are really what's driving your skiing. Core should always be tight, and arms should be in front of you. The more you can keep your hips downhill, the more in control you're going to be. You often see people moving their legs without moving their hips, or the kind of direction of their torso. And if you watch good skiers, they'll always be moving their body in tandem, and essentially your momentum will be going with where your hips are pointed.
So you're moving more as one unit between
Yeah,
core,
absolutely.
core, hips, and knees almost.
Yeah.
Cool. I had a really good follow-up question on that, and now I just forget. Oh yeah, I just learned this term today.
Okay.
Dryland training. So, I mean, how do you suggest people train for the slopes? Like, as far as dryland goes, like how do you and fellow ski patrollers or proficient skiers do in the off season to prepare?
That's a tough question, because downhill skiing is nothing like any other sport. I would say running, it's gonna help you a little bit, but mostly what I would say is ease into your season. That's such a tough question.
I know, and it's a little bit out of your scope, but I was just curious if there was anything that you feel like you do.
I just find that every season I'm super sore when it comes to the beginning. I generally go touring up Alta, like when the first snow comes and the lifts aren't even open, and halfway down the lift line, I have to take a break, and you're like, I've been like running all summer, I've been mountaineering, this shouldn't be hard. But there's a difference between aerobic training and anaerobic training, and I tend to think that most of skiing for people tends to be anaerobic. You're firing pretty big muscles. I've heard that wall sits are good before. One thing I might focus on is, anything to do with your legs is going to help. Running, biking probably be really good. If you can get some core involved, it's going to help you.
I'm going to kind of help you sum that one up.
Thank you.
have a good athletic base. Be prepared in different scenarios. Have a good strength behind you so you can be prepared for movements that do recruit a lot of muscle. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And then last question, if you could educate skiers about one thing, what would it be?
Oh man. The biggest thing I would say is that terrain is closed for a reason.
Very cool. And how about just injury prevention? What is
Injury
one thing you
prevention.
wish people knew?
I would say the biggest thing that's going to help people is if you fall, give up. The biggest thing that's going to injure you is if you fight when you're falling. The reason for that is if you're skiing and you fall backwards, what tends to happen is you fall back and you overextend your knees and you rip ligaments. So if you don't fight it, what tends to happen is you tend to flop over as opposed to forcing your knees in a position that will injure them. So one thing that I've always gone out and done with people I've been concerned about with skiing is you go out and you're like, hey, if you fall, this is how you're going to fall. And actually teaching people and their shock response to, a scenario in which you can't think about how to just fall without hurting yourself.
Right. Well, there's something, like practice makes perfect. If you're practicing that fall, you're going to ingrain some of that movement into yourself.
Yeah, and so, like, I'm a really good skier, and when I screw up and when I feel a crash coming in, and I'm most of the time skiing at a fairly slow speed because speed leads to injury. You can just fall and everything's going to be okay. Whereas if you're going fast, you fall and you have no control over the situation. And that doesn't mean you can't ski technical. If you get into some, double black terrain, something that's, 45, 40 degrees, it's going to be hard regardless of how good of a skier you are. You're just not going to accrue the same kind of risk that you would if you're going 50, 60 miles an hour on a green.
Very cool. All right. Well, guys, thanks for watching. Again, this is Chiro Movement Muscle and Joint Clinic. I am Nicole, and this is Tyler, Park City Ski Patroller and Mountaineer Tour Guide.
Sure.
Is that the right title? Thanks for joining us.